Let me tell you about a place that, if you didn't grow up in one very specific part of America, you've probably never heard of in your entire life. But if you grew up on Long Island, New York, between about 1965 and the late 1990s, you already know exactly what I'm talking about. A little red barn, a white silo, two covered driveways, and a clerk leaning out a window asking what you needed today. No getting out of the car, no shopping cart, no lines. Just pull up, holler out your order, and drive home with milk, eggs, and bread in under 2 minutes. It was called Dairy Barn, and at its peak, there were about 70 of them scattered across Long Island. Today, you can count the real ones left on 2 hands. This is the story of how a struggling dairy farm accidentally invented something far ahead of its time, and how it became one of the most beloved, most regional secrets in American retail history. Now, to understand Dairy Barn, you've got to go back further than you'd think. Back to the 1930s, and a young man named Dieter Kosman. Dieter's father, Edgar, was a Swiss textile manufacturer. World War II broke out, and Edgar, who'd come over to check on things himself, got stranded right here in the United States. His ship home, the Normandy, got commandeered into military service. He had nowhere to go. So Edgar did what a lot of folks did when life threw them a curveball back then. He looked for opportunity instead of waiting around. He bought a dairy farm out in East Northport, Long Island. Oak Tree Farm Dairy, it was called, and he handed the keys to his son, Dieter. Now, Dieter, he wasn't a farmer by training, but he had a good head for business. Under his watch, that little dairy farm turned profitable. By the 1950s, they'd stopped keeping cows altogether and started processing milk shipped down from upstate New York instead. Smart move for the times. But here's the problem Dieter ran into, the same problem that was hitting milkmen all across the country. Nobody wanted home delivery anymore. Folks were moving to the suburbs. Everybody had a car now. The whole rhythm of American life was shifting away from the milkman walking up your porch steps and toward mom hopping in the station wagon and driving wherever she needed to go. Dieter watched his wholesale milk business start to slip, and he had a decision to make. Now, around this same time, something new was happening in America. Fast food joints were popping up everywhere, and they had this new trick, the drive-through window. Folks loved it. Didn't even have to get out of the car. Dieter looked at that and looked at his struggling dairy business and put 2 and 2 together. What if you could get your groceries the same way you got your hamburger? In 1961, he opened the very first dairy barn, built it right there in East Northport, painted it barn red with white trim, a little wooden split-rail fence, and a small silo attached to the side. Purely for charm, mind you, it wasn't holding any grain. Just 2 covered driveways where you'd pull your car right up to a window. It was Long Island's very first drive-through convenience store. Nobody on that whole island had ever seen anything like it, and folks loved it instantly. Here's how it worked. You'd pull up, roll down your window. The clerk would lean out and ask what you needed. You'd say milk, a dozen eggs, loaf of bread, maybe a box of Entenmann's cake if you were feeling generous with yourself that week. They'd disappear inside, gather it all up, and come back out with a brown paper bag in one hand and your change in the other. No parking, no carts, no herding the kids out of the car in the middle of January. It caught on so fast that within just a few years, little red barns started popping up all over the island. By the time it peaked, there were close to 70 dairy barn locations from one end of Long Island to the other. Now, here's the part outsiders never quite understand. Dairy Barn wasn't just a convenience store. It became part of the rhythm of daily life on Long Island. Generations of families have a dairy barn memory, and most of them sound exactly the same. Mom pulling in after work, kids in the back seat, maybe still in their pajamas, the clerk calling out the total 472, and mom calling back, out of 5. Change and a paper bag, handed over in one smooth motion, and off you went, milk in hand, never having unbuckled your seatbelt. It did especially good business in the wintertime too, because let's be honest, nobody wants to unload 3 kids out of a warm car into a freezing parking lot just to grab a gallon of milk. Dairy Barn understood that better than anybody. For over 50 years, this was a luxury that existed basically nowhere else in the entire country in quite the same way. It was Long Island's, and Long Island's alone. So what happened? How does something this beloved start to disappear? Same story as a lot of regional treasures, honestly. It wasn't one single event, it was a slow accumulation of changes. By 2009, the Cosman family had begun downsizing the business and selling off locations. This wasn't a dramatic collapse, it was a gradual handoff. By May of 2010, a batch of locations had been sold to a single buyer, a father-daughter team, Mike and Agina Angeliades. And 38 of the remaining properties went to a company called Simi Enterprises, who rebranded most of them under a new name, The Barn. In 2012, the Cosman family made the difficult call to close down the original Oak Tree Farm entirely. That 37-acre property, the very land where this whole story started back in the 1940s, got sold to developers. Today, it's a 55 and older condo community. The dairy farm that started it all simply doesn't exist anymore. As Long Island grew more developed through the 80s and 90s, supermarkets and chain convenience stores expanded everywhere. Folks had more options. The novelty of a drive-through milk run started competing with 24-hour supermarkets and big box stores carrying everything under one roof. And there was a setback nobody saw coming, a literal fire. In 1997, the Oak Tree Dairy Processing Plant caught fire. Thankfully, nobody was hurt, but it took a full year and $11 million to rebuild. That's a brutal hit for a regional family business to absorb. By 2012, only 19 original Dairy Barn locations remained, alongside 25 rebranded barn stores. The number kept shrinking from there. Now here's where the story takes a turn nobody could have predicted. In 2020, the world shut down, and suddenly everybody wanted exactly what Dairy Barn had been offering since 1961, a way to get your groceries without ever stepping out of your car. The barn saw business spike by as much as 40% during the pandemic. After decades of decline, this old-fashioned idea was suddenly cutting edge again. It didn't last at full strength, though. In 2021, a number of locations got leased to a company called Greek from Greece, who converted them into something called GFG Express, selling imported Greek goods instead of the old Dairy Barn staples. That partnership ended by 2022, and the properties went back to Simi Enterprises. By 2023, many of those locations were put up for sale all over again. And here's the part that I think is genuinely heartwarming. Small local entrepreneurs started buying or leasing these old red barns, bringing back that original drive-through convenience store concept under various names. The barns themselves, a lot of them are still standing, still red, still recognizable to anyone who grew up driving up to that window. So today, if you drive around Long Island, you'll still spot the occasional red barn with a little white silo, some still called Dairy Barn, some called The Barn, some now running under entirely new names. A real institution called farm stores, which actually started even earlier back in 1957, still operates a similar concept too, claiming today to be the oldest and largest drive-through convenience chain in the entire country. But none of them quite carry the same collective memory as those original 70 red barns that defined an entire generation's grocery runs. One small detail that I genuinely love about this story: the founder, Dieter Cosman, spent his life as an avid scuba diver. Over the years, he built up a personal collection of over 117,000 seashells. After he passed, that whole collection was donated to a college for scientific research. A man who built a beloved regional institution out of milk and convenience and quietly collected one of the largest private seashell collections in the country on the side. Funny how people surprise you. So if you ever drove through Long Island and saw a little red barn with a silo on the side, now you know the whole story behind it. A stranded immigrant, a struggling dairy farm, a son with a good idea, and 50 years of Long Island families pulling up to that window in their pajamas. If you remember Dairy Barn, tell me your location and what you used to order.